you all hear me? Yeah, we're good? Wow. Let me just say, this is an awesome, awesome city. So I got in last night around midnight. Thought I was going to go to bed around 1 o'clock, but I still feel like I'm on East Coast time. So I'll be burnt out around 12, just so you guys know. Here to talk about AI-driven testing services, right? So I like the theme. Actually, when I saw the theme, it reminded me of some things I've done in my past, and then I thought, well, what could I talk about that's in my present that fits the theme? And it's real interesting. There's a lot of buzz around artificial intelligence. We'll kind of get into, in terms of this particular space, what folks are doing in the testing realm. Just a little bit about myself. Director of Quality Engineering at Ultimate Software, so I run the day-to-day there in terms of their testing practices, running, the leadership from a technical standpoint and a strategic standpoint at Ultimate. I'm also a professor of software engineering at Florida International University, which is my alma mater, where I did my PhD, right? So prior to joining Ultimate, I was a assistant professor at North Dakota State University. Anyone knows where North Dakota State University is? It's in a place called Fargo, right? Ever watched that movie called Fargo? Anyone heard of that movie? Well, if you ever look at the movie, one thing will resonate, which is the amount of snow that you have to deal with on a daily basis. And I'm originally from Barbados, so that was quite a bit of a shock. But I've published several papers in the software testing space, 30 plus research articles, published some stuff in this area of testing as a service, particularly around software testing in the cloud, service-driven computing. And the reason that I tell you all this stuff is not to brag or to make you think that I have the credentials to stand here and speak, but I have one source of motivation. This gentleman here, Tariq King Flex Nasheed. So how many people ever Googled themselves? I mean, I Googled myself, right? And the first time I Googled myself, I was a PhD student at Florida International University, and I kept getting this guy's stuff. And I was like, my goal in life is that when you Google my name, no matter where you are in the world, that I start to see my stuff. Because while I've published all these papers, Tariq King Flex Nasheed, his name is not even Tariq King, his name is Tariq, and he calls himself King Flex, has published papers and books on the art of macking and the art of gold digging. And that was not something that I wanted people to find before me, right? So just a fun fact. All right, so let's go back, right? Because, this talk has been a culmination from a couple of things. The first thing is that when it comes to doing something innovative or something new, you have to think differently. You hear people talking about thinking outside the box. Testing is usually one of those areas where you are asked to think outside of the box. But back in 1961, when JFK came out and said that he was going to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade, he had to be thinking differently. In other words, there was no one else that had done that. And so he literally had to be somewhere in the future where he had already put a man on the moon and then figure out how to work backwards from that point, right? That's something called right to left thinking. And obviously in 1969, Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. But this right to left thinking is where you put yourself in the future. In other words, you imagine that what you want to happen has already happened, and you are there in that future. And then you step back and see what you did, having been in that presence to make that thing happen. And then you go make it happen. Sounds real easy, but in 2015, as a test architect at Ultimate, I wanted to show our leadership that we could make ourselves better. And I wanted to apply this concept of right to left thinking to do that. And so I crafted a presentation where I imagined that the product that we built, which is a product called UltiPro, it's an HR and HCM, human capital management system, was the highest quality, the most performant. You know, it was the most amazing experience that a user could have. It was already there. So I planted myself in that future, and then I wanted to take them on a journey back to the future, just not so far in the future, but just a couple years back, you know, because I went forward 3 years, and just step back to show them what we did. And so I took them back to the future. And one of the main themes that came out of that future was this idea of building systems that were self-healing and were able to self-test. I was tricking the system a little bit because my PhD research was in the area of self-testing systems. But I was still thinking, what if we could really apply this to what we're doing here at Ultimate? How many PhD or academics in the room? Can I get a show of hands? So quite a few. One of the hardest things to do sometimes is when you have a topic for your dissertation and you want to carry that through is to really find a practical application for it. But software testing is a beautiful field because there is no testing without the practice of testing. In other words, testing is a practical endeavor where we seek to find real information about the system operating in its environment, right? And there's testing theory, but there's still this close niche with the practice of testing. And so, 2016, I was at Star West, and I had really been disappointed in the lack of innovation that we've had in software testing space. And if you're an academic researcher or industry researcher, please, there is a lot of opportunity in the realm of testing to make an impact. And so I did a lightning talk. One of the things that I focused on was the fact that we seem to have lost testing, right? Testing seemed to be one of these things where it was always put at the back burner. It was always thought of last. It still is. You know, the testers get forgotten until it's time to actually ship the product, and then we hardly have any time, and then we're all worried about quality. And one of the things we needed to do was to bring back testing, right? And the way that you could bring back testing was through innovation. And it was really a call for us to start looking at new and innovative ways to transform software testing. One of the other hashtags that I had was nice shoes, so I tried to wear nice shoes today. They're not the same shoes, but you got to live up to those hashtags. But if you think about it, testing is really, really hard. And especially at scale, testing is a very, very hard problem, right? And, you know, at Ultimate, we have 30 teams, over 500 people involved in the engineering process, 300 of them engineers, 100 of those are quality engineers or testers, and you're talking about 20 million lines of code, 300,000 documented tests, 280,000 tests, and you got to do all this continuously. That's a large process. But you know what? I'm not proud of this. I don't put this up here to say, wow, I have a great... This is headaches right here. 280,000 automated tests. Those are 280,000 things that we have to check for stability that fail all the time. That's rough. There's a huge cost to software testing. The other point was that testing is very manual. Even when we talk about automated testing, what really is automated testing? Well, automated testing is manually scribing or scripting, handcrafting test cases that will perform checks automatically. And when these things fail, it's another manual process to go through to figure out what is wrong with it, and is it actually an issue, or is there something wrong with the test that you created, or is there something wrong with the infrastructure in the environment? And then, of course, there's still a big focus even today in saying, hey, you know what, all that automated testing that we're doing, that's really just checking specific things. It doesn't bring us a whole heap of value. Yes, it may unveil if we have a regression, but we need to have our hands in the product. And so it's still a very manual process. And so I started thinking about what if we could have this grand dream of testing? Like, again, right to left. Let's think of a world where everything is actually fully automated. No more manual checking, no human intervention. Well, maybe not no human intervention, but maybe different human intervention, right? But nonetheless, not what we've settled for in terms of what we call automation today. And so then I started thinking we were having all these breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, and I'm not going to go through that history right now, but it was really becoming apparent that we were making some key milestones, hitting some key things in artificial intelligence that we thought were 10 years down the line. And so it was getting a lot more traction. And whenever I see something like that, I always think, well, how can I use this to help me in what I do today, right? And closely with AI, in which when you talk about artificial intelligence, it's really about whether or not computers can imitate intelligent human behavior. There's also this concept of, well, can machines actually act without giving them explicit instructions? We normally get machines to do things by programming them with very specific things. And so, in terms of artificial intelligence, the difference with the way that machines learn versus humans learn is that humans tend to learn from experience, right? I have a 4-year-old daughter. She doesn't do very well with instructions. You can tell her the instructions, but she will not follow them. But she knows when she experiences something, especially when it was something that was memorable for her, that she wants to do again, like play peekaboo or do something like that, she will remember and she will imitate just based on the example that she sees, right? And so can machines do the same thing? And really, it's really about data, right? Because machines can only observe if we instrument them to be able to observe. And then that observation, which is a data point, maybe can be used to help the machine to act without explicit instructions. And the way that we do this is that we come across an observation, if we're trying to observe something, and we say, yeah, you know what, that was a positive observation. And you start to train the machine. So you start with some randomly initialized function, and then as you see observations, these inputs and the outputs, you try to tell it, yes, that was a good input, that was a bad output, and so on. So artificial intelligence is actually all around us already, right? I mean, you talk about something that is still very much in its infancy, but you can see the increase in its demand. You got things like Netflix, recommendations, Pandora, detecting spam from email. I remember I was at a STAR conference and my wife was with me, and this is Better Software, I think, not a STAR conference, Better Software West, and she won this Amazon Echo. I never get lucky to win anything, but she always does, so I brought her along. And then I started to play with this thing around my house. And it was cool. It was like I was on the Starship Enterprise, right? Like, Alexa, turn on the television. Because I had her hooked up to my Logitech Harmony remote control. And I was like, this is stuff that someone said was impossible at one point, right? They said that we will never be able to process natural language. And yeah, it's not perfect, but it's there. So you have all these applications of artificial intelligence. What are we doing with them specifically when it comes to software testing? The other point that I want to kind of at least make sure that we understand what we're talking about here when we talk about testing as a service, because this talk is really about two things, right? Artificial intelligence and testing as a service. And so there's usually two things that we think about when we talk about testing as a service. The first thing is this idea of outsourcing. So you'll hear this. Can we outsource some of our testing activities to some third party or some service provider? And I think it's great to see the mix that we have here and the theme that we have here around a country specializing in this topic, saying, what are we doing to push testing as a service? I mean, that's incredible. The other piece of it, as just a purely outsourcing model, is the delivery mechanism. Typically, you can use cloud computing to enhance the delivery of testing as a service. So you're talking about using software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service to deliver these services that help companies outsource some of their testing assets and testing activities. And so it brings me to the point of this conversation, which is the present day. As I was going through thinking about the future of testing, thinking about what I could do where I am at, and I started to think about artificial intelligence, I started to search. And this talk today is really a story about that search, that journey, to see, was there anyone out there already looking at leveraging artificial intelligence to drive software testing? And so I came across these AI-driven testing services. And because of my inquisitive nature, I started to just search, and I found these 6 vendors that were all claiming to have AI-driven testing services. And yes, I say claiming because we are testers in this room, which means by default, we are skeptics. So we don't believe just because someone says. Otherwise, you would just ship the code because the developer said, I tested it on my machine and it worked. So what I wanted to do is find some way of evaluating and going through some at least informal way of determining whether or not these services were actually true. And so I formed this mental model. The first thing was that, well, let's look at what they're claiming. And I wanted to make sure that their claims were very explicit, they were precise, and they were realistic. Because I spent my career in software testing. And whenever someone says something about what they have or their tool and what it can do, I usually pick that apart and break it down both from a theoretical standpoint and from a practical standpoint to figure out something that doesn't jive well. Or yes, that is okay. That is something that we can achieve feasibly. The other thing was, what features did they have? You know, is it functionally going to work for me? If I'm the director of quality engineering, you're telling me that you have these services, well, I want to make sure that they're going to work for me. I want to make sure that they're generally applicable because I have several different products, and your process or your product needs to work with all of those different products. And it should be something innovative and new, right? Also, were these service providers knowledgeable about, one, the domain? In this case, the domain is twofold: artificial intelligence and testing as a service. Do you have experts in those areas? Because you can't solve my testing problem if you don't understand the complexity that revolves around testing. Or if you're using artificial intelligence, then you better have experts, because so far we haven't felt very comfortable with AI just yet, because we don't understand it. And then, do you understand some of the challenges involved in solving a problem like testing automatically? And then the people, right? People from the perspective of, if you have this service, do you have clients? You know, can I see that someone has said, hey, this is working for us? What about your staff? What does your team look like? And then money. And I've lumped this under people, but it's really is someone that you've been able to convince, willing to put dollars into this, to say, yes, we think that this is a viable business proposition. And so that was my informal mental model. And the reason I share that is I want you to remember that we're going to talk through some of these services as we do this. So the first service that I encountered was a service called Functionize. And clearly, www.functionize.com, you can check it out. And it says, the power of AI-driven software testing automation. And right here at the bottom, it says, complete coverage in a single cloud platform. So clearly the claim is AI-driven, and somehow there's this single platform that's going to give you complete coverage, whatever that means. We'll figure it out. So let's take a look at Functionize.
This is a story about you. You work on the web. You're in charge of the quality of your company's user experience and functionality on the web. You have a problem. Your testing tools are difficult to use, require developers, or are stuck on somebody's desktop. Deploying new versions of your website or application is scary and time-consuming because the testing cycle is too long and it doesn't work all the time. Your boss wants to know why your site is losing revenue or valuable leads due to quality problems. Take a minute to remember where you are right now, because this is the moment you heard about Functionize. Functionize will change the way you test and deploy your website or application. Functionize is the first browser-driven, cloud-based testing tool to combine all aspects of testing automation into a single platform. Easily record user sessions in your own browser and schedule them to test across all major browsers. Test your APIs, performance, load time, and security, all in a single platform. Integrate with GitHub, Heroku, Jenkins, and more. Sign up for a demo today.
What do you think? What did you hear? I heard a lot about a single platform. I heard about all aspects of testing being covered. But what didn't I hear? I didn't hear one thing about artificial intelligence. So is it implied? There's just magic in the background? So I was like, okay, well, maybe they missed the point, but let's continue looking. And so I went on their website, and surely enough, all aspects of testing, except if you look closely, there's an issue. Copy-paste error. I guess they didn't run their own website on Functionize because security and performance are defined exactly the same. So that wasn't very comforting. Again, I'm a skeptic first, so you got to convince me. So then I started digging deeper, and then I saw some videos from Ray at Functionize, one of the co-founders. And the claims got even bigger. Claims were like, Functionize is going to replace your entire automation department. Whoa. That's pretty interesting. I mean, if that's true, I would pay money for that, right? But as Ray was pitching, and in his pitch he incorporated AI and machine learning, I still didn't hear anything about how he was using artificial intelligence or what he was even using it for. And this was a pitch to a bunch of investors at Slush 2017. So I had to dig deeper because that video didn't help me very much. And so I ended up finding a talk. It was like an hour and 30-minute YouTube video that Ray did on what we expect from the smartest testing application in the world, talking about Functionize. And so I thought, surely there's something here. So I start watching this video. I get 30 minutes in, and I get to the slide where he talks about the technologies used and the overview. And surely enough, right there in the middle, I see the analysis engine that learns the application. So I'm getting excited. This is artificial intelligence. It says neural nets, Apache Spark, and Cassandra. And this is what Ray said.
We talked about how you combine the machine and human intelligence. What we found most effective so far was creating an advanced browser plugin to create the testing workflow capture. And that allows people who are not engineers to create the test cases, curate the test cases over time. And then use a combination of machine learning technologies. I wish I had time to talk about those today. We'll be talking about them later this week. But there's so much opportunity here that we could probably talk about that at an entire conference.
So again, nothing. Ray is talking about Functionize being this AI-driven tool. He talks about the record and playback, right? I think it's useful if you want non-technical or domain experts to be involved in testing. That's a good thing. But where is the AI, right? So I thought maybe if we look a little bit closer and ask Ray a direct question, and surely enough, there was points after where Ray was asked questions, and I found a direct question, right? So let's check this out.
So what is used from AI?
Oh God, yeah. So everything that we've been doing, we said we have a very basic requirement, which is anytime we can use machine learning to enhance what we're doing, we should. If there are reasons where we can't do it immediately because of product constraints, that's fine, we put it on the roadmap, but we should always be thinking about how can we use machine learning to enhance every aspect of the testing platform. So we think it's everywhere.
All right, so we look for every opportunity to use machine learning. We want it to be everywhere. If it's not there, we put it on the roadmap. And he ended off with, we think it's everywhere. So I was still very, very confused because I didn't understand where the machine learning fit in. And in Ray's defense, there's a point later where he mentions neural networks and unsupervised learning. He throws some k-means out there, but he really still doesn't talk about it. And so I ended up scheduling a meeting with Functionize and going through the process. And I realized that there still was so much infancy in what they were doing that there really wasn't much substance behind the machine learning and the intelligence part of what they were doing. So that wasn't very promising. I also said that we want to look at investment. So they had some investors. They were unknown investors. And I thought, okay, well, let's continue on, right? So the next vendor was some guys that built something that they call test rigor, right? Says 100%, remember we look at claims, 100% code-free autonomous tests, right? Accelerate releases, that sounds good. I can live with that claim. Then it says all combinations. Test all screens and every input combination possible using test rigor bots, but not just the ones you have time for. So I started to pick that apart. Test all combinations. Is it that he's testing all combinations, all infinite possible combinations of all infinite possible inputs? Or is he testing all infinite possible permutations of the infinite possible combinations of the infinite possible inputs? How can you ever live up to a claim like that? But anyway, let's keep going. It says improve regression coverage to 100%. This was a theme that we saw before, right? We saw 100% coverage. People love to use that term, but they don't realize, like, if you don't define what you're covering, 100% coverage means absolutely nothing. All right, so let's look at test rigor. And so I didn't find much marketing information. I just found one demo, and let's look at the demo real quickly here. Oh, hold on. Let's go by. There we go.
So you can create a new application here on the right, typing name and clicking add. Then you can go on application, upload new file. It will automatically be picked up and start testing. And you will see flows of applications being discovered. And for each of the screens of each flow, you can say, hey, this is not how it should look like. Now, once this is done, you will be able to upload the next version of application. And during testing, it will compare new version with old version, and will mark bugs in your flows as failed automatically.
All right, so what you just saw was him creating an application, and at least, because I saw nothing of Functionize, they didn't really have much except a record and playback plugin. So this was still good to at least see that there was some discovery engine, right, that was looking at flows of an application. But then it was very manual, right? It was, and this is still the beginning of being able to train something, right? To be able to train something, you have to be able to say, remember we talked about good or bad? So at least if he's able to identify, hey, this looks like an issue, and say this is bad, then that starts the beginning of something to learn. But there still was not very much clarity about, you know, how things are gonna work, or even how they achieve this stuff, right? And I don't have a problem, right? People might have trade secrets, but when you tell me that I'm gonna have no more testing and I'm gonna have 100% coverage, then before I put my money into your product, you have to at least convince me that you've understood and solved and can share and talk about some of these challenges. Agreed? So, test rigor didn't work for me just yet. The hard part about it was that I could find no sources of funding. They did register for a small business and innovation research grant, SBIR, which is good. Shows me that they're looking at least for funding, but there were no awards just yet. And there was just 2 guys that were working on it. All right, so next up was Apache. So far it's looking pretty gloom, and I know we start off with gloom, but don't worry, there's light. Light is coming, right? Light is coming. But this is my journey. This is how I started. And somebody light starts coming with Apache. Apache says that they have AI-driven testing with real user conditions on real phones, right? Get your app performance and functional test report in 14 minutes. And the cool thing about Apache was that they talk about a lot of different pieces. So they talk about their functional network and so on and so forth. A lot of these things circle around because they only do mobile, and specifically Android, around mobile testing services. And I'll talk later at one of the tutorials about how to augment your mobile strategy with testing as a service. But mobile testing services are actually pretty well-defined and pretty well used, because it really helps alleviate moving some of that assets and those infrastructure over to a third party. So at least I was feeling a little bit more comfortable with what they were talking about, but I still didn't understand the artificial intelligence driven piece of it. And then I started to see their dashboards. And some of their dashboards said things like, oh, the app has crashed, view the device details. So it told me something is navigating through this application automatically, and their plan included paying for 4 bots or 5 bots, or having an on-premise to have a lot of different bots crawl through your application. And I thought, well, even if these bots aren't very intelligent, still can pull out some useful information based on some of the reports that they were generating, right? Things like, okay, the app took 7 seconds, and on this iOS or Android version, and this is usually a problem because anything more than 3 seconds is something that you should consider to look at. Wasn't very intelligent yet, but was useful. Then we dug deeper. They could really look at some very powerful insights with the data they were pulling. And so I thought, that's also very useful, but I want to see more. And they had this metric that they defined called the Chi score. Chi means good, I think. And it was kind of cryptic there. But nonetheless, I could say, well, this seems like it has promise, right? They started to first introduce a lot of their clients. First one that I saw, that they were in 175 cities. This was just recently updated. And some of their clients had comments. So, useful service. Still need to hear more about the artificial intelligence, but at least it was looking up. They had a team of 13 people outside of the 2 C-level executives. And what I found that was pretty incredible was that they built this company by funding it from driving Uber. Well, the CEO, he actually is part of another company, but he started to work on this startup idea by driving Uber and also getting family and friends to invest because he was having a hard time pulling from investors. All right. So that's the third one that was kind of iffy. And then here comes AppDiff. This is where my light started to shine, and it went up from here. So AppDiff is a company started by Jason Arbon. Jason Arbon is ex-Microsoft employee, ex-Googler, also co-authored how Google tests software with James Whitaker, who was my advisor in college. And so I started to feel credibility there and comfort right away. But usual stuff, not too far on the claims, right? So superpower your testing. You see things like accelerate coverage. And one of the powerful things that made me start to think, hey, this is really going the right direction, is when he started talking about the initial goals that they had as a company was to look at the differentials between versions, right? And just provide a service where people can identify things that have changed. Because things that have changed are interesting, right? Because that's where we may find our issues, right? When we're testing, the last thing that we change is usually the thing that has an issue. And if we can start to identify whether or not those things are true issues, then that can give us this, this beginning to train a artificially intelligent driven system on how to look for issues in general, right? So the diff was cool. He had the bots, no setup required. And what really started to drive it home to me is that I was actually first at Better Software, and he started talking about it. He showed a demo of his bots running. And then this year at Star East, he presented AI and machine learning for testers. And this is when I started to see some of the details that I was looking for from everyone else, right? How you can get AI to replace your handcrafted test cases. How we can build a neural net and train it, right? You train that bot by saying, hey, here's what your application looks like, and here's some interesting things you can do with it, and that's good or bad, right? So pinching to zoom on a hamburger button, that's not very interesting, but tapping it is. And you can train the bot to interact and for input. And then you can also train the bot to just look to how you can actually reduce those inputs, right? Because remember, we talked about testing challenges. And when you talk about all these infinite number of inputs for this and that, you got to tell me how you're reducing that, and how you're going about doing that. And so he started to talk about that and how he trained the bots to kind of approach testing like a human tester would. And then he talked about anomalies, right? Obviously, traversing the application is one thing, but how do you know when something is wrong? Again, machine learning and artificial intelligence can be applied to that problem. You know, you show it 1,000 screens of an anomaly. And if we start to think deeper, we can continue to think of any aspect of testing and training data for that and start to teach these bots how to identify certain things or what test cases for boundaries look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a lot of hope. And then he said one thing that made me feel a lot more comfortable because I'm a skeptic, which is that he thinks that, you know, his bots can really do good at basic tasks. But there's probably like a third of the space, right? Because another big challenge in testing that we talked about is domain knowledge and really specific scenarios and how do you come up with those? Well, how your bot solving that? And he's like, well, they aren't right now. They're not. They're just kind of halfway there. And that was a realistic outlook on these things, right? Because your claims now meet the expectations of things that you're delivering. And that he was going to be trying to work and focus on the other ones that required more deep, complex knowledge. Investment. So he had some good investors, right? Funded in terms of seed, so $5 million. And I thought that was a good start. And so finally, I found someone, and he was also very willing to share and talk about this. Remember, I'm not doing this for me to provide a service. I'm trying to just contribute to this space, right? And he was willing to share a lot of the things that he was doing. All right, Sophie.ai. So this was another one that was rather interesting in the approach. This one applied to mobile, but this time tackled also both iOS and Android, similar to Jason, also tackled both mobile platforms, but he was focused again on mobile. And Sophie was the newest member of your team. And you saw, well, no scripts, it gets smarter, so there's mention of learning, talks about platforms and so on and so forth. And this was one of the major selling pieces of Sophie and how Sophie works.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm a testing bot for your iOS and Android apps. I test your app for performance, reliability, functionality, and user experience. Getting started is super easy. Simply upload your application and I'll get going right away. You can also train me on any specific app details, so releasing your app is faster and can reduce costs by up to 95%. I can help you produce a higher quality app that your customers will love. Best of all, I am trained collectively by all developers. This means that if one developer shows me some awesome hack, all devs benefit. So why wait? Upload your app right now and receive quality insights in no time. Sophie, making your app better.
So I thought that was pretty cool, right? Because it was like the Alexa for my testing, right? And a lot of talk about learning, a lot of talk about, training it based on, your developers and retaining that knowledge. A lot of that artificial intelligence is all about that. Can we get an expert by training a machine with the human expertise, right? And I thought there were some very common things there in terms of, performance, reliability, functionality, and so on and so forth. And the cool thing about this was that, again, all this started around 2015. Most of these startups were founded at that point. But Saeed Hamid, who was the founder, him and co-founder Justin Hartin, they were ex-Microsoft employees, 18 years experience with both of them, each of them, I should say. And they had been pushing on this for a long time. And one of the cool things was that they had won an award around, entrepreneurial startup of the year and their spirit of how they were building stuff. And that within the first few months they were launching, they already had 30 plus customers or brought weight to it. Now they're out of startup mode and in preview mode. So it made me even more curious. Sophie is their initial company was called Quantize, and that's where you see the Quantize up there. But, this to me again had credibility based on what they were doing, and then there was numbers. So I couldn't find the investment numbers, but they do have a lot of referenceable clients, so that was good. All right, so last but not least was Unravel.io. And Unravel was pretty interesting because it was different from the others. A lot of the others were kind of bots crawling through and doing that stuff, and this one does have some sort of semblance of that. But they really created this test definition language where you could script a test in natural language, right? You see it here going. And it was driven by machine learning, had the infrastructure there, but they had some key features that I thought were pretty cool because I want to be able to validate what this thing is doing. So here, you could define your test definition, your test that says, hey, go to this URL, set this field to something, do something else, and you could actually execute it, right? So it was like a live IDE that you could use to kind of do that. And notice these are not commands that it's interpreting, this is just natural language. And then it could run that test and go through. And I thought that was interesting because if we're gonna train a bot how to test, then I need to be able to have visibility into, is it actually doing the kind of things that I want it to do? And if I can specify intent, and you'll see some examples here, where, especially if I can do something like go to cart, I mean, that's powerful. And it can figure out like what that means and kind of help traverse. And then the more of these things that you can kind of feed it. And they were also sharing a lot about their API level documentation, right? Give some credibility when you can talk about the implementation of what you're building and how things are processed. So this is their queuing system. And then how things are returned, right? The return objects for whether or not an observation was true or false, right? Pass or fail. And so Unravel was pretty cool. And with every execution, they record a video. Other testing as a service, AI-driven powered things, take screenshots and stuff. I'm sure video is possible, but it's always good to have a video that can kind of help guide with what exactly happened and what's going on. And so these guys are based out of Ireland. They keep very low key, but I think they're a good contender to watch. And there's a CEO with more of a business background, but then their CTO has a lot of domain knowledge about automated web testing, which adds to their credibility. They also raised €550. And, I thought, hey, here's another serious contender in this space. All right, so just to kind of start to wrap this all in, title of this talk is about fact, fiction, or future, right? Like, where are we with this thing? And here are some observations, right? The first one is that when we talk about this AI-driven testing, most of everyone is focused on mobile. There's a few, Unravel.io focused on web. Functionize claimed some web stuff, but I didn't really see it. And with mobile, you have two things. You have limited complexity, and so you have a smaller scope problem, but also mobile seems to be the future. So there's a plus side there as well to mobile. And it might just make the testing problem complex enough for us to start gaining traction, right? The other thing is that the bots that are out there right now are at most semi-intelligent, right? But you only have to be better than the average tester, which in some cases isn't that great, unfortunately. But there's also power in numbers, right? You have a lot of these things hitting something at a time, and you can get some pretty powerful analytics, right? So hundreds of semi-intelligent bots are pretty useful still. No matter how you look at it, AI is here. And AI in testing is also here. Now, whether or not we are groundbreaking and innovative, that's up for question or debate. But I would argue that the bots are actually already in the building. The question is, are we in the building or are we outside of the building? Because what are we doing? What are we doing to either do something groundbreaking, or are we just sitting around waiting because we think we won't ever be replaced with bots, right? And actually, and I don't want to spill too much of that, but there's actually quite a lot for us to think about here, you know? In a few months, I'll be presenting at Star West on whether or not testing can actually terminate or be terminated by artificial intelligence. Because we don't seem to think it can, at least that's the feeling I get from people. But there's a lot about the testing problem and a lot about artificial intelligence as a solution that just maps just like this. And if anyone is going to get replaced, it's going to be testers that are just doing somebody same, right? And so I encourage you to tune in. Either come in person, that would be great, and that would be awesome to see some of you there. But if not, there's a virtual conference that you can all attend for free. So register for that when the time comes around, and let's continue talking about it. And, you know, I talked a lot about the different experiences that I had with different folks. And part of it seemed very dark, and the other part seemed like there was some light. But I just want to say this. This is pretty awesome for all of these vendors to be exploring this space, right? Because we can't just keep using our same thinking and problem solving to solve new problems, right? We got to do that right to left thinking. We got to come out of the box and try something new. And at least for each of them, they're trying something new. And so I commend them. That's pretty cool. But I also think that there's too many of us who are not involved. And this is a really good research topic, right? And you'll see when we go through at Star West and kind of pick apart the testing problem, that there's a lot of opportunity here for us to do research and innovate, right? And so I leave you with that. Let's try to see what we can do to help contribute to innovating and using artificial intelligence to kind of take us to the next level when it comes to testing.